Welcome to the Library Reads Virtual Book Expo 2020 author interviews. I'm Rebecca Vnuk, the Executive Director of Library Reads. Normally, I'd be greeting all of you at BEA in New York City at our evening and lunch author panel events. Since those are canceled this year, we still wanted to try and connect you with these great authors and their upcoming books. This is video number 1 of 2, representing the authors that would have been at our evening author panel. You can find a list in Edelweiss for ease in requesting and downloading advanced reader copies of all of the available titles featured in both videos. The link is there on your screen, bit.ly/LibraryReadsBEA20books. We'll also have that link available on our website and on our social media channels. You can also reach out to the various library marketing teams for more information and for copies. You can find those contacts on our website, libraryreads.org/resources. Thanks for joining us for these brief author chats. We hope you enjoy them. Lisa Jewell is the internationally best-selling author of 16 novels, including the New York Times bestseller Then She Was Gone, as well as I Found You, The Girls in the Garden, and The House We Grew Up In. Her debut novel, Ralph's Party, was an instant Sunday Times bestseller. In total, her novels have sold over 2 million copies across the English-speaking world and have been translated into 16 languages. Her upcoming book, Invisible Girl, is another taut and white-knuckled thriller following a group of people whose lives shockingly intersect when a young woman disappears. Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for joining us today. I want to dive right in to talk about your upcoming book, Invisible Girl. So that's out in the United States on October 13th this year. Can you share with us a little bit about the plot for this new book?
Yes, I can. You're coming to me at a point at which this is only the second time I've had to explain the plot to the book. It's one of those things that the more times you explain it, the more polished it becomes. So the first couple of times you try, it sounds a bit clunky, but I'll do my best. So Invisible Girl is primarily about a young girl called Sapphire Maddox. She is 17 years old. We meet her talking to us in the first person about the last year of her life, which culminates with her disappearing from outside the house of her former psychologist, therapist, at midnight on Valentine's night. She was having therapy for a few years as a child because of a childhood trauma that happened to her that we don't find out about until later in the book. It's also about her psychologist's wife, Kate, and her marriage and her suspicions about things that aren't quite right within her family. And it's also about a guy called Owen Pick who lives opposite Kate and her husband. Owen Pick is 33 years old. He's a bit of a loner. People in the area will call him a bit of a weirdo. He's got a reputation for being a bit creepy, but there's no evidence to back that up. When Sapphire Maddox disappears from opposite his flat, he finds himself being the prime suspect.
Oh, you know, that's one of the things I really like about your books. You have so many different threads going on that, yeah, you know, no one's quite what they seem and everyone's, yes, a little sketchy, and this sounds like another great one just like that. So yes, what inspired this story? Where did you get the idea for this particular?
Well, like the family upstairs, my previous book had been inspired by a woman I wanted to write about. There's a woman I just saw on holiday one summer when I was in France who I couldn't get out of my head. For some reason, she just triggered off all these images and ideas. And it was exactly the same with this one. This time it was in London, and I just saw this guy walking down a hill just near to where I live in North London. And it was snowing, and there were little school kids running around the place throwing snowballs at each other, and he was lugubrious. It's the best word I can think of to describe him. He just had an air about him of, you know, he looked young, but he had this old air about him, like nothing fun had ever happened to him, like he really struggled with just being. And I don't know, for some reason, I just wanted to get inside his head and work out what sort of guy he was. So I wanted to write a story for him, and he's the guy who ends up being Owen Pick. And right from the get-go with writing Owen, and it's what you were just saying about my characters, you're never quite sure whether they're good or bad, and that's because I always leave my characters leeway to be good or bad. So I never know before I start writing the book who did it or who the real criminal is in the piece, because I like them to show me their true colours as I write them. So I had no idea when I started writing Owen if he was going to be the bad version of his potential or the good version.
Oh, that's really cool. So this is kind of an off question. So do you find, do real people that you come across in real life, is that what spurs you sometimes? You just said for like the last 2 books, these were people that you didn't know that you had seen, and your imagination kind of kicked in. Do other people in the world kind of kick in your imagination like that?
It's really random and it's really weird, and it's really hard for me to pinpoint exactly what the starting point for each of my books is, because it changes with every single book. I mean, there are some books I've written where the starting point has been a big sort of light bulb. Oh, that would be a really interesting theme to write about. I'd really like to write. And so that's kind of more of a big picture thing, which I then have to find a storyline and characters and ideas to fill that big picture frame. But yes, this one and the last one very much started with tiny little thoughts of a person who I wanted to explore and get to know and work out what their motivation was and what their history was. And so it's different with every single book.
Oh, that's very cool. Awesome. So speaking of all your different books, so tell us a little bit of how you kind of got into crime writing. I know you wrote so many wonderful books before you transitioned into these suspense novels. I myself was a huge fan of chick lit back in the day. We won't say how long back that was, but I remember reading all of yours back then. And I actually remember when you started writing more family drama and suspense, I was like, wait a minute. This is Lisa Jewell who wrote like Rave's Party and is that the same author? So how did that, but I love it because they're 2 very distinct styles and you write them both so well. How did you transition from sort of romance and chick lit into suspense and drama?
Well, it was really, so as you say, chick lit was quite a long time ago, which is remarkable given how young you and I both are.
I mean, right? Yes, we were babies writing this, primers.
But yes, so I started writing my first novel in 1995, 96. And we're now in the year 2020. I've written 18 novels, and I've always liked the dark side. The sort of book I would have picked up to read at the time that I wrote my first novel, which was a really feel-good romantic comedy. But at that time in my life, if I picked up a book to read, it would be a thriller or a dark literary book, so I didn't actually read in my genre at the time. And my first novel was a big hit. So, you know, my publishers took a punt on a debut novel that really paid off, and which of course meant that they would like my second novel to be quite similar to the first novel. And then but then I sort of grew in confidence and my life changed and I grew older, I had children, things happened. And I think with every single book, I was just pushing it a little bit harder and a little bit darker, but always being so conscious and aware of my readership and not wanting to lose them, which is why I think I never did that right. I've had enough of writing about lovely, 20-somethings running around Soho having love affairs. I want to do, I never had that moment. It was just like, I wonder if I could just have this sort of slightly dark character in this book and if anybody would notice. And then it just sort of, and then as you say, I got into the family dramas, which meant I could introduce much darker themes because I wasn't having relationships, romantic relationships in those. And then in The Third Wife, which I think was my 12th novel, which was supposed to be another family drama, I found myself getting halfway through thinking, I'm bored of writing about this family and all their dynamics and their angst and their issues, and I killed a character in suspicious circumstances, and I kind of killed her, and I thought I'll worry about who did it and why later, but so that was a kind of turning point, but it was, it still wasn't a crime novel as such. So it's just been this very gradual thing, and I've been really lucky that my readers have allowed me to do that. And my publishers have allowed me to do that. And nobody ever said, stop killing people, go back and write about lovers again. So no, it's been a really gradual journey, but really enjoyable as well.
That's great. And it's worked out very well.
And it has, yes.
So have you found that are there major differences in your approach to writing, say, a romantic comedy or a family drama versus a suspense novel? Do you, maybe I should ask, do you find yourself like, oh, this is getting too dark, I wish I was writing romantic comedy? Or do you just kind of, it just flows and then there you go? What's sort of the difference in writing?
Yeah, I kind of don't think of it like that, about whether it's getting too dark or whether, you know, or whether it should be more like other things that I've written. In terms of having a different approach to the writing of the novel, I would say you need, for writing a romantic comedy, you need a much smaller toolbox. You still need to be able to be a good writer, and you need to be able to plot, and you need to be able to do characters and dialogue and all that technical stuff. But the toolbox is much smaller and less cumbersome. Once you start killing people and creating mysteries and secrets and crimes that need to be solved, you're suddenly adding more and more tools to the toolbox, and it becomes quite heavy sometimes, because actually I'm putting the toolbox here in my hands, it's actually inside your head.
Yeah. You know, I never thought about it that way, right? That it's a lot more complicated.
Yes, it's a lot more complicated.
You have to keep track of.
Yeah, and like so in a romantic comedy, you could just think, oh, I really fancy setting a scene in, oh, I don't know, in London Zoo. I'm going to have my characters go to London Zoo, and it's going to be all lovely. So you can do these lovely set pieces that don't move the plot along, that are just wonderful sort of, you know, scene setting things. Whereas if you wanted to set a scene in a crime novel in London Zoo, there'd have to be a really good reason for it. It would have to mean something, or everything, all the pieces have to, you know, come together to mean something, because the reader is constantly, as they're reading the pages, looking for meaning, looking for answers. So everything has to have some sort of function or purpose. So it's different in that way.
That's a really interesting insight. I never thought about it that way. As a reader, I never thought about how much process there is behind it. You're right. You can't just set it at the zoo if you feel like it. It has to have there's a meaning behind that. Now as a reader, I'm going to be sort of keeping that in mind. How interesting. Well, thank you so much. You know, so your book, again, Invisible Girl, is coming out here in the US on October 13th. And I wish you much success with that. I know your last two novels, we were chatting before we recorded, and I said your last two novels, I had the pleasure of reviewing them for Booklist magazine here in the US. I haven't been assigned your next one yet, but hopefully those will also get starred reviews, because I think you're definitely a great treat right now for reading in your suspense and crime. It's delightful. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you.
Raven Leilani's work has been published in Granta, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Narrative, Yale Review, Conjunctions, The Cuts, and New England Review, among other publications. She won Narrative's 9th Annual Poetry Contest and the Matt Clark Editor's Choice Prize, as well as short fiction prizes from Bat City Review and Blue Earth Review. Luster is her first novel. Sharp, comic, disruptive, and tender, Raven Leilani's debut novel Luster sees a young Black woman fall into art and into someone else's open marriage. Razor sharp and sly, sexually charged and utterly absorbing, Luster is a portrait of a young woman trying to make sense of her life, her hunger, her anger, in a tumultuous era. It is also a haunting, aching description of how hard it is to believe in your own talent and the unexpected influences that bring us into ourselves along the way.
Thanks so much for joining us today to talk about your upcoming book.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to dive right in. This is your debut novel, Luster, comes out August 4th, 2020. Could you share with us a little bit about the plot for the book?
Sure. So the plot follows a young Black woman who's sort of in pursuit of her art. She is working a dead-end job and kind of sleeping around to little success and just trying to feel things. And she enters a relationship with a much older man who's in open marriage. And the bulk of the book sort of follows the complicated relationship that develops between her and his wife and adopted daughter, and how her pursuit of art develops in between these relationships.
Got it. So what inspired this story? Where did the idea for this particular storyline come from for you?
Well, I was working on a project before this that wasn't really moving me so much, so I kind of moved to something that I felt excited about and that felt really alive to me, and that was art and rage. And I find myself often sort of returning to those subjects. And those are, I guess, broad categories, but I wanted to write specifically about female rage and about a Black woman's sort of a linear trajectory to finding her art and realizing her potential. I wanted to talk a lot about, how that journey is often, filled with detours, depending on what you kind of have to do to satisfy that primary need. You have to work, you have to, in this case in the book, pay your student loans, and you can't necessarily go after the thing that is in your heart. And so I kind of wanted to talk about, the many deferrals that I think a lot of women and a lot of Black women can have to feel in their pursuit of their art. And I should say, like, the art itself is painting. And all throughout the book, she's trying to paint her self-portrait. And she can't, she struggles with it. And that is partly, because it's, for me, I mean, hard to paint a face, hard to paint. But in general, I wanted to speak to the distortion, that happens when you kind of have to curate yourself in different environments, which is definitely, especially for a Black woman, the reality of what it is to survive. So what is it when you bring that to, the canvas? You can't see yourself. And so I wanted to write about her beginning to see herself, but I also wanted her to be, a human character. I didn't want her to be pristine. I wanted her to make mistakes and to fail, because I think failure is, most of the art making process, or the making process. And I wanted to talk about, like, the private work that, most people don't see. So that was where the book came from.
Got it. So speaking of art, you are an artist yourself. Is that correct? Is that your artwork in the background?
It is, yes.
Very cool. So you were able to pull some of that inner knowledge of being an artist into your character. That's great. So aside from being an artist, you also have won awards for your poetry and for your short fiction. So how do you compare the experience of writing short pieces to writing a full-length novel? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would say that I started in poetry. It was the first thing I fell in love with. And for me, poetry, what was exciting to me about it was the texture, the sound of it, the sort of the focus on like, I guess it's texture on the page. And so, like, that was something I needed to carry into my longer form work, where I was really excited and obsessed with, what it looks like on a sentence level. And I feel the same way about short stories, even though that's sort of like for me, the mid-step between, for me, poetry and writing a novel work was, I just wanted to write something that felt alive in the way that I feel like the best poetry is really alive and deliberate in its choice of language. And so, yeah, that was, I feel like they're kind of connected in that way. But for a novel length piece, like, it was kind of an excuse to delve more deeply into, since I have, like, a more generous allotment of pages. It was an excuse to just talk about everything that I'm obsessed with.
Yeah.
So I think that's the writing I like to read, and the writing I like to do is the writing that comes from a place of, excitement and obsession. So I kind of the kitchen sink is in there because I had the page space.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think people are really going to connect to this. It sounds like a really exciting book. So thank you for spending time to talk to us about it. And we wish you much success with this.
Thank you.
Emily Levesque is a professor at the University of Washington and lives in Seattle. She received her undergrad at MIT and has won the American Astronomical Society's Annie Jump Cannon Prize and Gold Medal of Honorary Patronage from Trinity College Dublin, among others. From frigid nights beneath mammoth telescopes to bears loose in the observatory, award-winning astronomer Levesque shines a light on her travels and adventures with her fellow stargazers. The Last Stargazers shares the tales and experiences of astronomical observing. Weaving together stories from over 100 astronomers and observatory employees, the narrative introduces readers to how modern observatories are run, shares some of the many incredible stories from the astronomy community about what it's like to work at a telescope, and reveals the transformative developments in astronomy's immediate future. These love letters to astronomy show scientists infusing their research with passion and creativity, inspiring all to peer skyward.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Hi.
So I want to dive right in to talk about your upcoming book, The Last Stargazers, which is coming out in the US on August 4th, 2020 from Sourcebooks. Can you share with us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, so this book is about what it's like to be a professional astronomer and what it's like to actually study the universe as a job. There's 7.5 billion people on our planet, and only about 50,000 of us are astronomers, and our jobs are very unusual. So this book seemed like a good way to give people a sort of behind the scenes tour and glimpse of what it's like to do this as a job, some of the incredible adventures that we get to experience on our own planet while we're trying to answer these amazing fundamental questions about the cosmos, and hopefully puts a bit of a human face and a human story with the field that I know can sometimes seem a bit far-reaching and esoteric to lots of people.
So as a narrative history of observational astronomy, The Last Stargazers is full of your personal experiences and stories from other scientists. Where did the idea of putting this all into a book come from? Were you like keeping a diary this whole time of being an observational astronomist and I should put all these into a book? Or what spurred you on to put this into a book?
I actually had somebody ask me at one point whether I'd ever thought about writing a
cool.
popular science book. And my immediate answer was, no. And then I thought about it for a moment and thought, well, what sort of book would be really interesting? And this came to my mind because these are the stories that astronomers tell each other. When we go to a conference or when we all meet up after a research meeting, people will start telling these tales of, oh, did you hear that one about the telescope that got shot? That story about somebody who was stung by a scorpion in an observatory, or that telescope that operates out the back of a plane. And we tell these stories to one another because they're sort of the shared human experience for each of us. And what I realized is that those are the stories that resonate the most with people when I go and give a talk about how stars work or the universe or things like that. And in telling those stories, you can also learn a lot about how astronomy works and why we do what we do. So there's a lot of sort of science and interesting detail about how astronomy works in these sort of hijinks stories, or sometimes absurd stories of how we do the work. So it seemed like a nice way to marry the science and the sort of quirky stories that we all sometimes run into.
I love it. A mix of science and storytelling.
Exactly, yeah.
Very cool. So as an accomplished professor and researcher, you've already written 2 scholarly books, as well as dozens of papers and articles. How did the experience of writing a popular science book differ from what you had done before?
I have actually always really loved writing, and I'd always liked the idea of writing a book in the abstract, and was so thrilled when this idea sort of appeared in my head. I found parts of it much more fun. You get to have so much more fun with the prose and the writing and the just sort of color and liveliness of what you're writing. And some aspects are surprisingly similar. I tell my own stories in the book, but I also share the stories of a bunch of my colleagues. And I interviewed over 100 fellow astronomers, which was a process that took a couple of years. And I came at it in a very scientific manner so that I could organize my notes. So I had this big notes file that was like, all right, people with observatory stories about animals. And then within that, how many people have spider stories, or how many people have bear stories, or how many people, and sorting through that and gathering all the information was very scientific, because I would have multiple people tell me different versions of the same story.
Oh, how fun.
get wonderful tall tale versions of things that I then had to hunt down. And having research expertise helped in terms of assembling all of that, so that then at the other end, the readers just get a fun explanation of what it's like to be an astronomer, and stories that are nice little nuggets of sort of what we do in our day-to-day life. But that was similar. I think the writing experience was very enjoyable, to really get to have fun with the words and the beauty of what we do, because that doesn't always come across in a research paper.
Awesome. So can you tell us one of your favorite parts of the book, or maybe something in it that you think might take readers by surprise?
So I actually asked this question to almost every astronomer that I interviewed. I asked them, what do you think would surprise people the most about how we do astronomy? And almost every single answer was some version of, people don't realize we don't look through telescopes anymore. Nowadays, we'll put really amazing digital cameras on the backs of telescopes, and we rarely actually look through them with our own eyes. One of my most memorable personal stories was the first time I did get to look through a huge telescope with my eye. They actually put an eyepiece on it and let myself and some colleagues look. And it was amazing, because we were all trained professional scientists, and we'd written serious scientific papers, and we knew all the physics and thermodynamics behind everything that we were looking at. And then we put our eye to the eyepiece and just go, oh, it's so red, it's so cool, it's shiny, it's sparkly. Like, we just immediately sound like excited 6-year-olds.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah. A lot of our excitement, though, comes through some of the creative stuff we can do with telescopes. So I think my favorite chapter in the book deals with something called airborne astronomy. So these are telescopes that we can put in the backs of airplanes, or that we send aloft in aboard rockets or aboard high altitude balloons. There's wonderful and fascinating science reasons behind why we do that. And it's quite an adventure to make sort of airborne missions like that happen. I got the chance to fly on one of those telescopes, and it was an amazing adventure.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Well, I'm sure that readers will be really excited to kind of have a look at a world that they're not familiar with otherwise. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
It's a world that I'm really excited to share with everyone.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and for the people viewing. And we wish you much success with The Last Stargazers, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you so much.
Helen Macdonald's best-selling debut, H is for Hawk, brought the astonishing story of her relationship with Goshawk Mabel to global critical acclaim, and announced Macdonald as one of this century's most important and insightful nature writers. H is for Hawk won the Samuel Johnson Prize for Nonfiction and the Costa Book Award, and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Kirkus Prize for Nonfiction, launching poet and Falconer Macdonald as our preeminent nature essayist, with a semi-regular column in the New York Times Magazine. In Vesper Flights, Macdonald brings together a collection of her best-loved essays, along with new pieces on topics ranging from nostalgia for a vanishing countryside to the tribulations of farming ostriches, to her own private vespers while trying to fall asleep.
Hi, Helen. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about your next book.
Hello.
So, your next book, Vesper Flights, comes out on August 25th, 2020. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's a collection of pieces of essays, and they're all really different. There's everything in there from bird watching in the Empire State Building at night, which you can do,
cool.
to pieces on headaches and deer and refugees and like spies. I mean, it's a real kind of collection of all sorts of different things. But I hope that all of the pieces have a few things in common, and one of those things is wonderment and joy at the world we're in. And a lot of them are about the natural world as well, my favorite subject. And yeah, they're kind of sort of hymns of love to the natural world and the world around us. And I think, one of the deep things about the book is trying to sort of say that the world doesn't just belong to us. It belongs to this sort of glittering profusion of life, and we should sort of celebrate it.
Okay. So your first book, Worldwide Phenomenon, H is for Hawk, that was a memoir.
Yeah.
So did you find writing in the essay form what was different about it? Was it more difficult? Were there similarities? Tell us a little bit about your writing process for this one.
Yeah, actually, a lot of these essays were commissioned by various magazines, newspapers. So some of them were written according to subjects that I was given, and that was always quite exciting to try and learn about a subject and produce something there. Some of them are just me chasing down things that sort of fascinate and bewilder me, or encounters I've had with animals. So some of them are very lyrical and some are more kind of journalistic. I think what is like Ages for Hawk is that not only are there sort of deep themes about how we relate to the natural world, but there's a sense in which there is a kind of a story that's told throughout. There's a lot about me and my life and how I came to sort of think the things I do. And I think if you read it from beginning to end in one sitting, you'll see there's an arc there. There's an arc that is a little bit like Ages for Hawk, you sort of mesh together and produce something like that.
Still a little bit on the memoir side. I mean, personal essays kind of are, aren't they, right?
Absolutely.
Very cool.
You've got to put yourself in there. There's a lot of, there's even some funny stuff in there as well about my childhood. So yeah, hopefully that's going to be quite enjoyable for readers.
So the pieces in this collection are set in far-flung corners of the world, but also many of them take place in your own backyard, a neighborhood park, on the outskirts of town, lots of natural urban settings in this book. So what do you hope that people will take with them from Vesper Flights as we sort of emerge back into our semi-revived natural world after this lockdown? What do you think readers will sort of take away differently after being in their homes and now all of a sudden being unleashed on the world again?
Yeah, really, we're living in obviously really strange times, and you know, there is this sort of sense that when we think about going into nature, we kind of presume we have to strike out into the backwoods and the mountains and the hills, and you know, this book shows that we don't need to do that. You know, we can encounter astonishing things right on our doorsteps. You know, even that there's a spider with an egg sac, like guarding it right by my oven over there. You know, she's part of the natural world too. I'm not going to brush her off. But I think this whole pandemic is making us think too very carefully about why we value the natural world, what it is about nature that we need, what it tells us, what it can speak to us of about our own situation. And the essays in the book are centrally connected to that. So I hope it can be a sort of friendly companion to almost kind of like shifting the way we appreciate the world around us. And it would be lovely if it could be helpful in that way.
That's great. Well, like I said before, the book comes out in August this year. So hopefully we will all be, things might start getting back to normal by that point. Yeah. So we wish you much success with this book. I'm sure that readers, especially those that loved Ages for Hawk so much, will also flock to this one. So thank you so much for talking to us today about it.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's been a joy, and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. So too.
Naomi Novik is the acclaimed author of the Temeraire series and the award-winning novels Uprooted and Spinning Silver. She is a founder of the Organization for Transformative Works and the Archive of Our Own. A Deadly Education is the story of an unwilling dark sorceress who is destined to rewrite the rules of magic. Every sorcerer has a gift, and mastering their gifts in a unique magical academy means a chance of being invited into the enclaves of the world's magical elite. Elle Higgins' talent is for mass destruction, and this dark talent has alienated her from others. She protects herself from the scorn of other magicians with her mordant wit and defiant spirit. But she also hopes that one day she will join a prestigious enclave, and that means ingratiating herself with the powerful and the privileged. With flawless mastery, Novik creates a heroine for the ages in Elle, a character so sharply realized and so richly nuanced that she is sure to live on in hearts and minds for generations to come.
Hey.
Hi, Naomi. Thank you so much for spending time chatting with me today. I wanted to dive right in to talk about your upcoming book, A Deadly Education, which comes out September 29th, 2020. So this is the first book in a new planned trilogy. Can you share with us a little bit about the plot for this book and where you see the trilogy going?
So the trilogy is actually almost, I'm writing book 3
oh,
right
how
now.
exciting!
So yes, I'm actually in the third book.
Oh, that's very cool.
So, you know, interestingly, I originally planned it as a duology. It was going to be 2 books. And, you know, what I wanted, my last 2 books, Uprooted and Spinning Silver, have been standalone books. And I really liked being able to write the complete story and then go back and revise based on what I knew, where I had ended up in a way. Because I'm not someone who organizes, I don't outline, I don't do any of that. And so I had a plan for these 2 books, and I told Random House I wanted to write the 2 books before we did anything else, no copy edits, nothing. So I was going to write these 2 books, and then I finished the first book and discovered that it hadn't ended where I thought it was going to end.
Okay.
And that's how it turned into a trilogy. On the plot, you know, it's inspired by every book I write always has many inspirations, but the most direct inspiration for this is a folk legend of a school called the Scholomance, which is a dark school of magic that, you know, was sort of reputed to be run by the devil. And the point of this school was that the 10 evil sorcerers would come to study black magic, and they would live in this school where there were no teachers, and they got their spells written in words of flame on the walls and out of the darkness. And at the end of their studies, when they graduated, the last one out the doors became the devil's prey. It was the devil take the hindmost. And so that was sort of the foundational element. And that's a legend that I read about first when I was about 10 years old in my school library. And that I've carried with me. That it's one of those, it was literally like a page-long piece. In fact, I have it. I should show it because
that's so cool. Yes, please.
I managed to get a copy, not stolen from my library. I did actually get it. And so basically I kind of was thinking, here's the very evocative image.
Oh, that's
right?
So cool.
Yes. And so that's stuck in little me's head for a long time. And then of course, obviously there's so many, Harry Potter is the absolute, you know, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. I've written Harry Potter fanfic. And that the things that I like about the magic school tradition, right? That's such a common trope, you know, it's so much fun because it's so powerful for us all. You know, almost all of us have had some experience of being in school. Almost any reader who picks up the book, you know, if they're old enough to read it, they have been in school at some point in their life. And so that the rhythms of the school year are written into us. And that's that combination of wanting to have the rhythms, that classic sort of trope, that modern day classic trope, and merging that with this school that is truly a terrible place. And so the fundamental question is, why would you send your children to this school? Why would anyone go to this school? Why would anyone pay the terrible price, which in my case is not literally like the devil. It's, you know, but it's just, you have a 1 in 4 chance of graduating this school alive. Why do you go there? And my answer is because you have a 1 in 20 chance of making it out alive on the outside.
Nice.
And that, essentially answering that question became the fundamental process of writing the book. And my heroine is someone who has quite a complicated relationship with being at the school. She does not have she in some senses has, she's almost an antagonist in that she is not, she's sort of very prickly, very angry for reasons that we learn as we go on through the book. But she was a very much came from, for me, from the position of the classical antagonist in those magic school books, and kind of trying to get into that character and make that character into a real person, and follow them and their story. So that's the sort of not at all straightforward experience.
I love it. I love it.
Basically, yeah.
I think that's so cool that this is like, you've had this germ of an idea since you were a kid, and like now that's really, I love that. This is really fascinating. And so I know that, so Spinning Silver, for example, was rooted in fairy tales, right? Yeah. And your Temeraire series is alternate history. And I know that you've said before in other interviews that a lot of your family history is sort of, it comes out in these books a bit, you know, you're the Polish side and the Jewish side. And have you brought any of those elements into this, or is this going to be something completely new? So people who have read you, will they be like, oh yes, here we go? You know, is that sort of like a thing that carries through all of your books, or is this going to be something that people are going to go, oh, this is totally new for her, this is different? What can without giving too much away, what can you tell us about that?
I can say it's totally different.
Cool.
I tend not to, I tend to write quite different things.
Yes.
At each time I sort of start something new. I feel like in many ways, Uprooted and Spinning Silver were together. They were a set. Uprooted was very much my mother's family, and Spinning Silver very much my father's family. And those two sides of the story were kind of being told. And then this story, it's always interesting for me to try and think what is going on in my life sometimes, or in the world, that is moving me towards a particular story at any one time, because I almost always have a large number of competing ideas.
Okay.
And it's sort of which one is the one that suddenly catches me at the right moment and makes me keep going. I do think, certainly, I have a daughter who's in school now, and that's probably coming into this quite heavily. And also I think that the world as a whole, various things going on in the world have pushed me in this direction. But it's never, for me, it's never sort of very explicit. Like afterwards, after I write the book, I turn around and sort of say, oh, I see where those things came from. In this case, it's not, I wouldn't say it's certainly not the same focus on my Slavic roots and my Jewish roots. But I do think that it's not unconnected, in the sense that I do think Elle has quite a bit in common with Miriam from Spinning Silver. And it is also the same in one respect, which is Uprooted, Spinning Silver, and now this were all first-person narrator books. And it was interesting for me, because before I wrote Uprooted, I literally never wrote first person. I was always writing third person.
Okay.
But for me, so I do think that that's one point of commonality with among these books, and they're all about young women in sort of this moment of crisis, in this kind of coming of age moment. And why am I writing that right now? I do think that part of it is I am, on some level, I want to write books that I hope will be for my daughter what there were books like that for me. I think of Robin McKinley's books. I think of Patricia McKillip. I think of Ursula Le Guin. What those books meant to me, and Narnia and Tolkien, and those books, I want to write that book for her. I want to write those books for her. And that's sort of where the stories are coming from right now. And we'll see where they go. I don't really know. But I would say that each one of these is quite different. And that's not something that I'm consciously trying for, but I think I tend to get bored. I want to do something new, and hope that people sort of follow me to the next
yeah
step. Yeah.
That's great. So to wrap up, I was going to ask, what do you hope readers take away from reading this book? And you sort of touched on this, that you would like this, you know, you have touchstone books in your life and so is that kind of what you're hoping people get out of A Deadly Education, is something that they're like, that they can see themselves in a little bit and maybe grow up with? And
yeah, that would be wonderful. You know, I would say, if I wanted to, you know, the question of what is the one thing that I would most love, you know, I would say that Uprooted and Spinning Silver, I think of as those touchstone books. That's what I was trying to do very much there. I think with Deadly Education, I do think there's one different piece of it that I quite like, which is that I felt very strongly as I was writing this, that the world of the Scholomance is a world that you can imagine yourself into quite easily. That you can imagine being a wizard in this world. And that it's set in the modern day, unlike my previous books, which are set in more historical times or more fairy tale-like settings. And because of that, I think, and this is, in fact, you know, I went with that classic trope of the wizards are among us and we just don't know. And it's, you know, the sort of the secret world trope, which I also deeply love, because it lets you sort of, it lets you live in the story in a way.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what I would love for A Deadly Education, for people to feel like it's a world they can live in, imagine their own characters into, imagine themselves into, that kind of fanish sort of engagement with it that I had with so many works as a fan fiction writer. And so that would be my ideal goal if I was
awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I know that A Deadly Education will be a great success when it comes out, and we're all looking forward to it. And thanks again for talking with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. I'm so sorry we can't get together in person this year.
I know. I know. We'll have to make sure we do it at some point.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for taking the time to view these BEA 2020 author interview videos. We hope that you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed recording them. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank all of our authors for spending their time with me. And I'd like to thank the various publicists and library marketing folks who were able to make this happen. It took a lot of coordination with a lot of different schedules to get all of these videos together. And while I'm very sad I didn't get to meet these authors in person, in this Zoom era of ours, I hope that you found the videos entertaining and interesting. Now, I'd like to direct you to our website for just a moment. As you can see on our homepage, we always have the current list available. And then at the bottom, there is a link to download a clean copy, PDF printable. We encourage you to use those for displays and library handouts. And speaking of those lists, you can head to our archive and find all of our lists going all the way back to 2013. There's also a link on that page that will take you to a sortable spreadsheet of the master list for all of the titles. So some of you might find that easier to cut and paste the text from if you're using our list information for your website, your social media, or your in-library displays. The website also has our Hall of Fame section. We developed this in fall of 2018 and decided from that point on, when an author's third title would place on the LibraryReads monthly list, they would move into our Hall of Fame. And you can see here, we've got lots of fabulous authors on it. If you click in to an author's profile, you'll see all about their most recent Hall of Fame title, their previous titles that made the list, etc. Using the other links on the top of our page, you can find out a little bit more about us and what we do. We also have a full FAQ page. You can also find out what's new with LibraryReads, and you can find out how to participate in what we do. There's information there on how to vote for titles for the list and how to use us if you're a library staff member, how to get involved with us if you're a publisher. There's a link here to our marketing materials, which you are free to use online or in printables in your library. And then you can check out our resources page right here as well. Now that we're not able to do events in person right now, and our publisher partners aren't either, we're trying to gather kind of a little space of where you can easily link to all of the online things that are going on in the world of library reads and readers advisory. On our website, you can also, on any page at the bottom, subscribe to our email newsletter. And I promise we don't sell your info or spam you. We generally only send out a few emails each month, one announcing the monthly list and one as a reminder to vote every month. So there you have it. That's Library Reads. Thanks again for participating and for watching our videos. Have a great rest of your day. Emily Levesque is a professor at the University of Washington and lives in Seattle. She received her undergrad at MIT and has won the American Astronomical Society's Annie Jump Cannon Prize and Gold Medal of Honorary Patronage from Trinity College Dublin, among others. From frigid nights beneath mammoth telescopes to bears loose in the observatory, award-winning astronomer Levesque shines a light on her travels and adventures with her fellow stargazers. The Last Stargazers shares the tales and experiences of astronomical observing. Weaving together stories from over 100 astronomers and observatory employees, the narrative introduces readers to how modern observatories are run, shares some of the many incredible stories from the astronomy community about what it's like to work at a telescope, and reveals the transformative developments in astronomy's immediate future. These love letters to astronomy show scientists infusing their research with passion and creativity, inspiring all to peer skyward.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Hi.
So I want to dive right in to talk about your upcoming book, The Last Stargazers, which is coming out in the US on August 4th, 2020 from Sourcebooks. Can you share with us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, so this book is about what it's like to be a professional astronomer and what it's like to actually study the universe as a job. There's 7.5 billion people on our planet, and only about 50,000 of us are astronomers, and our jobs are very unusual. So this book seemed like a good way to give people a sort of behind the scenes tour and glimpse of what it's like to do this as a job, some of the incredible adventures that we get to experience on our own planet while we're trying to answer these amazing fundamental questions about the cosmos, and hopefully puts a bit of a human face and a human story with the field that I know can sometimes seem a bit far-reaching and esoteric to lots of people.
So as a narrative history of observational astronomy, The Last Stargazers is full of your personal experiences and stories from other scientists. Where did the idea of putting this all into a book come from? Were you like keeping a diary this whole time of you know, being an observational astronomist and I should put all these into a book? Or what spurred you on to put this into a book?
I actually had somebody ask me at one point whether I'd ever thought about writing
Oh,
a popular
cool.
science book. And my immediate answer was, oh, no. And then I thought about it for a moment and thought, well, what sort of book would be really interesting? And this came to my mind because these are the stories that astronomers tell each other. When we go to a conference or when we all meet up after a research meeting, people will start telling these tales of, oh, did you hear that one about the telescope that got shot? That story about somebody who was stung by a scorpion in an observatory, or that telescope that operates out the back of a plane. And we tell these stories to one another because they're sort of the shared human experience for each of us. And what I realized is that those are the stories that resonate the most with people when I go and give a talk about how stars work or the universe or things like that. And in telling those stories, you can also learn a lot about how astronomy works and why we do what we do. So there's a lot of sort of science and interesting detail about how astronomy works in these sort of hijinks stories, or sometimes absurd stories of how we do the work. So it seemed like a nice way to marry the science and the sort of quirky stories that we all sometimes run into.
I love it. A mix of science and storytelling.
Exactly, yeah.
Very cool. So as an accomplished professor and researcher, you've already written 2 scholarly books, as well as dozens of papers and articles. How did the experience of writing a popular science book differ from what you had done before?
I have actually always really loved writing, and I'd always liked the idea of writing a book in the abstract, and was so thrilled when this idea sort of appeared in my head. I found parts of it much more fun. You get to have so much more fun with the prose and the writing and the just sort of color and liveliness of what you're writing. And some aspects are surprisingly similar. I tell my own stories in the book, but I also share the stories of a bunch of my colleagues, and I interviewed over 100 fellow astronomers, which was a process that took a couple of years. And I came at it in a very scientific manner so that I could organize my notes. So I had this big notes file that was like, all right, people with observatory stories about animals. And then within that, how many people have spider stories, or how many people have bear stories, or how many people, and sorting through that and gathering all the information was very scientific, because I would have multiple people tell me different versions of the same story.
Oh, how fun.
Get wonderful tall tale versions of things that I then had to hunt down. And having research expertise helped in terms of assembling all of that, so that then at the other end, the readers just get a fun explanation of what it's like to be an astronomer, and stories that are nice little nuggets of sort of what we do in our day-to-day life. But that was similar. I think the writing experience was very enjoyable, to really get to have fun with the words and the beauty of what we do, because that doesn't always come across in a research paper.
Awesome. So can you tell us one of your favorite parts of the book, or maybe something in it that you think might take readers by surprise?
So I actually asked this question to almost every astronomer that I interviewed. I asked them, what do you think would surprise people the most about how we do astronomy? And almost every single answer was some version of, people don't realize we don't look through telescopes anymore. Nowadays, we'll put really amazing digital cameras on the backs of telescopes, and we rarely actually look through them with our own eyes. One of my most memorable personal stories was the first time I did get to look through a huge telescope with my eye. They actually put an eyepiece on it and let myself and some colleagues look. And it was amazing, because we were all trained professional scientists, and we'd written serious scientific papers, and we knew all the physics and thermodynamics behind everything that we were looking at. And then we put our eye to the eyepiece and just go, oh, it's so red, it's so cool, it's shiny, it's sparkly. Like, we just immediately sound like excited 6-year-olds.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah. A lot of our excitement, though, comes through some of the creative stuff we can do with telescopes. So I think my favorite chapter in the book deals with something called airborne astronomy. So these are telescopes that we can put in the backs of airplanes, or that we send aloft in aboard rockets, or aboard high altitude balloons. There's wonderful and fascinating science reasons behind why we do that. And it's quite an adventure to make sort of airborne missions like that happen. I got the chance to fly on one of those telescopes, and it was an amazing adventure.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Well, I'm sure that readers will be really excited to kind of have a look at a world that they're not familiar with otherwise. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
It's a world that I'm really excited to share with everyone.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and for the people viewing. And we wish you much success with The Last Stargazers, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you so much.